This is the Other 22 Hours podcast. Hey, you found yourself in another episode of the Other 22 Hours podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Shafer-Haiss.
And I'm your host, Michaela Anne. And since this podcast is not even a year old, thank you so much for checking us out if it's your first time. And thank you for coming back if you've listened to previous episodes.
Yeah, those of you that are repeat listeners, we know there are thousands, maybe even a million different podcasts out there. So the fact that we're in your repeat rotation is really humbling. Chances are, whether you're a new listener or a repeat listener, you heard about this show via word of mouth. Maybe a friend told you about it. Maybe you saw it on social media. And we have a simple ask that you share your favorite episode of this show the same way you heard about it. Maybe it's on social media. Maybe you just text it to a friend to check out. That is the main way that we can get more listeners to our show. And the more listeners we get, the more guests we can get. And the more guests we get, the more ideas we can share back with you guys. So any little bit helps, and we really appreciate any of it.
Yeah, and we're not your typical music promo show. We're not promoting the latest album, the latest tour, or the highlight reel of successes in someone's career. We want to talk about the in-between times, what they've had to overcome to get to those highlights, what they continually overcome, and we focus on the behind-the-scenes tools and routines that they've found helpful in staying inspired, creative, and sane while building a career around their art.
Yeah, and all of us know that there is very little that is in our control in this industry. There's a lot that's left up to chance. I think it was MC Taylor from His Gold Messenger that said, it's like walking into a casino every day. And it's pretty much that. But things that are in control are our mindset, our habits, our creativity. And so with all of that in mind, we invited some of our friends and some of our favorite artists onto the show and asked them the general question, what do you do to create sustainability in your life so that you can sustain your creativity?
Yeah, and today's guest is exciting for me. She and I go back a very long way. We have very vivid memories of being 18 years old. We realized today we've been friends for almost 20 years, which is insane.
Yeah, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see white hairs pop out of my head in the moment when that is realized.
But Carney is our guest, and she's an incredible singer and songwriter. She currently writes for Disney Publishing and has cuts with artists like Nick Jonas and Joseph and Adam Lambert. She has been a backup singer for the Jonas Brothers, for Hailee Stanfield, for her brother Reeve Carney's former band called Carney. And we have a really in-depth, incredible conversation with Paris talking about the challenges and the positives of finding your own space when you are surrounded by incredibly talented and highly successful people.
Just having that so close to you when maybe your own career isn't going exactly how you had planned. She shares one really humbling tidbit where she'd been living in LA and decides to move back to New York where they grew up. And she ended up getting a job being an usher in the theater where her brother was the lead in Spider-Man on Broadway. And just what a crazy dichotomy that whole thing was.
Paris is someone who is constantly looking to self-improve. And this is the first time I've talked to her in a long time. And she felt the same as she did when we were 18, 22 years old, just really full of vulnerable honesty and positive love that just emanates from her.
Yeah, I was honored to just get a few words in this conversation.
Sorry about that. We were definitely reminiscing for a little bit.
It's fun. You'll definitely get a few laughs out of it regardless. I don't want to keep you from those. Without further ado, here is our laugh-filled, reminiscent conversation with our friend Paris Carney.
This whole week I've been replaying so many memories, and the last time I saw you, I can't even remember. I feel like we were in our early 20s, maybe the last time I physically saw you, when you came to New York.
Yeah.
And I think you opened a show for your brother at Bowery Ballroom, and I sang harmony with you.
Oh my gosh, I forgot about that.
And I think, didn't Earl play bass with you?
Wow.
Yeah. I completely forgot about that. Michaela, that was 2011?
Yeah. I had a day job. I worked at Nonesuch at the record label because I just remember meeting you after work.
Wow.
Yes. We went to a bar thing.
I think so. And I'm pretty sure that was the last time we were physically together, because we've tried a couple of times when you've come through Nashville, but haven't gotten together. But over 10 years. And we've known each other almost 20 years.
I think a few more gray hairs just popped out over here on the side of my head.
Honestly, that's too real, really. For me
that just
morning.
upset me.
We're no, we're still children.
Yeah, wasn't it just yesterday that we were in the new school like cafeteria ordering stuff. And
I don't
pretty
know
much
if
all
I
I ate
ever
were
went to the new
cookies.
school cafeteria ever.
Wait, really?
No.
That's all I was ever. I was only there. But with 13th Street, because we had it in our dorm. That's
you know
why.
what? It was like in the basement or something like that. Is
Yeah.
that- okay, I might have gone there
Yeah.
once or twice, but I lived at like Loeb Hall, so like the only thing at Loeb Hall was 40s and cigarettes. That was about the only thing in that entire building.
40s! I talk about this Edward 40 hands.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Rebellion stage.
Oh man. But I remember there was like a cafe on
5th floor.
not the 5th
Oh,
floor.
that's
the third,
right. It was the
5th floor was
Yeah.
where jazz
Was
school
jazz.
was. Yeah.
That's I remember. I went there. Yeah. a lot of
Yes,
coffee.
and the coffee. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
actually,
man.
those were the good old days. I don't know if you know this, Michaela, but I drank Red Bull all of high school. I was addicted to it. And then I went to new school. Vanessa, who was in the program with us, she was like, that is so unhealthy. I'm going to force you to drink coffee. You need to drink coffee. Trade to coffee. And I'm addicted to coffee. So thanks, Vanessa.
Yeah,
Oh my
cheers.
gosh. Yeah.
Cheers.
I already had my 2 cups. I can't have any more than 2 or I will
No.
have more breakdowns, which I've already had today because we're potty training our 2-year-old.
Oh.
Anyways, I won't go into
my.
the TMI details, but I've already cried today.
Like, I don't know how to process that.
Yeah, it's also disgusting. It's gross.
Generally, what it is just generally disgusting.
Okay, so to preface for our listeners who have no idea what we're talking about, you have such an interesting career path. And there's so many holes that I don't know about in the past 20 years. We met at jazz school where we were both singers in the jazz program. And in my impression at that time, your thought was like, oh, I want to be a solo singer. And then all this other stuff has happened. You quit school to join your brother's band.
Yeah.
You joined your brother's band, Carney. Your brother now is in Hadestown. Is that right? Is he
Yes.
still in Hadestown? Then you toured with them. You put out some solo records.
Not until I left the band. 3 years I was in the band. And then touring, like you said, like I left new school and went immediately on the road. We opened for a good friend of ours named Johnny Lang. And my brother, Reeve, he was the only one signed to Interscope, but he was signed to Interscope newly and a priority. So we were all stoked. And, you know, I'm 18 at the time, like, woo, we've done it. And toured for a bit. And then in 2008, I left the band. I'll put in quotations. But I left the band and there was like a bunch of complicated things that went down. Not from me, but like behind the scenes, management. And that's when I started doing solo stuff. I had written a song in high school that was terrible. Of course, your first songs always are. And then had never written again. So like when I left the band, it was like the very, very first time that I was writing songs on my own and playing guitar. And that's how I got into the solo stuff. That wasn't jazz, because obviously I loved jazz singing. I still do.
Yeah. So then you did your solo stuff. What happened in between to get you to where you are now, where you're a pop songwriter? Like you work with Disney Publishing, right? And you have major cuts with Nick Jonas, Joseph, who we love.
Yes.
Adam Lambert. And you did other backup singing. So like tell us the abridged version of how you got to this place that you're in now.
Essentially, after I started doing solo stuff, as you guys, I'm sure, can both imagine, I had so many almost deals. Like, it would be like, oh, this label is interested. And then it would be like, actually, no, like, they've already fit that place. It was a combination of maybe me not knowing what I wanted or being like, do I like that person? Like, there's a lot of moving parts. Or honestly, a lot of it is like self-worth. Like, do I deserve this? Like, there's a lot of things going on. And then I would get approached by like The Voice, American Idol, just emails, do this. And I'd be like, well, maybe I'm not a good songwriter, like all of that stuff. And then I didn't stop writing and I didn't stop pursuing it. But then I started playing these nights in LA, this small club called Room 5. And while that was happening, I met my husband through a mutual friend. And basically I continued doing that. But in the real world, we got to get jobs when we don't make money from music. So I started working at Nordstrom at the perfume counter. And that was great. It was a great life experience. And like I had shows at night, people would come to the shows, and I ended up moving to like Park La Brea. And that was across the street from Nordstrom. So I would walk to Nordstrom and then I would play my gigs. Anyway, Greg and I are dating at this time. And he's touring. So the funny irony is Andrew now plays for Hanson, bass player in Hanson. And my husband was the bass player of the Jonas Brothers.
Yeah.
And so it was very like, the connection's very strange. But he was already the bass player when we started dating. And he had been since 2005. He was in the band when they first started. They're all his best friends. Now all of our best friends.
He basically is the fourth.
Yes. No, he is. I would say there's 5. No, honestly, there's like 6 or 7, really.
Okay.
6. But they're the greatest. And he himself was songwriting. I wasn't pursuing songwriting, I should mention, for anyone but myself. I was always writing for myself. I was always writing, and I was it came naturally to me, and I wanted to do it. It wasn't like hard work or anything. And then he was songwriting for other people, and this is like 2010. I would be like, man, how do you do that? Like for other people, like I just did not understand, how do you write for people and know what they want to say? And then Greg was on tour. They'd been touring a ton. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to move to New York. I need to move to New York. I'm going to pursue other things. I'm going to quit Nordstrom. My brother at the time, Reeve, was doing Spider-Man on Broadway. And so we had all these, I guess, connections in the theater world. And people were like, you should do theater. You know, you would be great for that. And I was like, really? I just wanted to be in entertainment. At that point, I was like, I want to sing. I want to be on stage. So I went to New York. That's when I played my show, Michaela, that you sang with me. And it was fun. And I had a great 6 months. Actually, no. I did get crippling anxiety at that point in my life, the worst that I'd ever had living in New York. Even though I'd lived there, I'm from there. You know, I'm like very accustomed to that like pace of life, but I just got crippling anxiety for whatever reason. And Greg was like in and out visiting me in New York. And then he proposed when I was living in New York. But as soon as we got married, 2 months later, he was about to go on tour again with the Jonases. And we're used to that sort of life. And we didn't expect anything different. And then we went out to dinner with Nick, and he was like, hey, I want you to sing background vocals to me on tour. And I was like, oh. Then I got hired as their background singer, toured with them until they broke up in 2013. That was like a really bad anxiety-inducing time for me, for a lot of trauma for my brother's band. Fear of like not being good enough and all that stuff. So it was beautiful, but it was also like a growing time of, whoa, I have to face the stuff that I'm burying.
You're saying the time you were in the band or when the band broke up?
When I was in my brother's band, I had a lot of like worthiness, not feeling good enough. And then when I left, but actually I got let go by the management, which was really messy and crazy.
Yeah, and so tough with your brothers.
Yes, really, really tough, because it was not my brother's decision. But at this point, I'm like, I've healed from it so much. But the main premise was management was like, you being their sister is not sexy. That was the reason. And I was like, what? That's why I got let go. And it was like, if you weren't their sister, it would be okay. If you were their brother, literally, those words came out, it would be okay. But since you're their sister, it's not sexy, it's not working. And I was like, what? But then also the band dismantled. There's a lot to that. And there's been so much personal healing. And I don't think it's healthy to harbor resentments. So I'm just like, okay, that was what it was. Obviously, there's things you work through. But at the time, it was really hard. And, you know, singing background was really hard because of course, you're facing those sort of, wait, am I back where I was? Am I good enough? Oh, is this weird? Why did I get here? Is it just because I'm married to Greg? Of course, there's going to be an element to that. Absolutely. But I think it's all in like how you treat yourself. And I definitely was not treating myself in a loving way at the time, but I grew a lot, thank God. Now, like, it was hard, but now I'm thankful for what I went through.
One of the things people ask a lot about on this podcast, we're always talking about all the stuff behind the scenes that the public doesn't see, like all of the messy stuff that can be really traumatizing, and just how hard it is to continually decide, okay, I'm going to keep doing this, and I'm going to find where my place is after I've been like knocked down time and time and time again. So one of the questions always is, well, what are the things that you did to help yourself grow?
I love that stuff because that's the most important. First, I just had anxiety. And so I was like crippled by it. And I didn't want to talk to anyone because I just felt like that was weak. I didn't want to draw attention to it. Thankfully, in 2012, I found a therapist. This is like years after all of this went down. I found a therapist that was good, but also it was like an interesting time in my life. There were good things, but I think the reality is also therapists, they don't know you, obviously. They're not necessarily going to know how to speak to you or what might trigger you or what. For me, was a lot of like, I needed to be told I was enough. I needed to be told that I could believe I was enough. The first therapist it's hard sometimes, but I think we have to in this industry, or like for us in particular in music, we need to like have a front sometimes. You don't want to look like you don't have it all together because then you seem weak. You know, someone's like, well, it's a hard business. Be okay with harsh criticism and, you know, all of that. You don't really want to be like, I have problems. Also, I will say this. To me, it felt like even though I had internal struggles, they weren't presented outwardly. And so I felt I couldn't play the card of, well, I'm just a lunatic. I'm that kind of artist. I was too put together on the outside to play that. That's not authentic to me. So I'm glad that I didn't play that, you know, outwardly. But basically, therapy led me to new therapy. I love self-growth. I was that person in high school that was like, the next year I'm going to be better. I'm going to, whatever it was at the time in 2001, like I'm gonna like, you know, clear my skin and like work out and, you know, all this stuff. I just was always very like
self-improvement
into that. Yeah. And so that I think is a gift too, because I could self-motivate. That being said, after a certain point of being knocked down, you do question, like, am I supposed to be doing this? Is this the right thing? And I have diagnosed depression and anxiety, but depression was like the one that I think was so hidden that it was very damaging. I was able to like hide it and then not deal with it essentially. So this is fast forwarding a lot, but like COVID really shook me in the sense of, oh, there's a lot of things I'm dealing with them, but there are blocks and like things buried that if I can get there, I think that there can be real change and real like breakthrough.
I was also going to say, because I feel like what you were saying about the music business, I think I've learned over the years that this business, as well as many other industries, uses the business as justification for being really shitty humans to each other. So then there's this mentality of, well, if you can't hack it, then you don't belong here. So if you're crumbling because you heard some mean things about you, then you're not meant to be in the entertainment business. Maybe that's true, but then I wouldn't want to be in that business anyways. But getting to the point where you can, all of the work that some of us have to do to feel confident and happy to be like, well, I don't care then, but I'm going to keep doing the music part and let things happen. And one thing about you, we were friends in each other's lives at a very young age and then have just seen each other from afar for 20 years that's followed. But I so vividly remember early on with you, like you always had such a magnetic positivity and enthusiasm for everybody. But I was close enough to you that I knew also the anxiety and this stuff inside. And I remember so much that time that you came back and I was working a day job and I was like starting to play in like the folk scene in New York. I was starting to get my first taste of struggling of where do I belong and the kind of creeping competition of, okay, am I worthy? And I remember talking to you about it and then being like, oh, whoa, this is like a whole other level for Paris because I'm like operating in this, even though it's New York City, this little folk scene that happens in here. And your community was your brother on Broadway and your boyfriend in the Jonas Brothers. And I was like, this is like
massive
levels that I think I would be like destroyed.
Oh, yeah. Like how to like, kind of like how do you size up? Like in that way?
Yeah. So, and I remember even at that age, because I think you were like, weren't you for a moment doing like ushering at the theater?
Yes, I forgot. Yes, I was ushering. That's literally when I moved. It's not a bad job, just the context of it was pretty strange. Because I was ushering for my brother's show on Broadway, and it was like a mind F.
But the reality of like, just because you're related and connected to people who might have a direct income from their work and success, there's like this weird mindset of like, oh, well, then you're probably fine. It's like, no, actually, we all have to like, even if I'm like semi-famous, that doesn't automatically mean I have money to pay my rent.
No, totally. And I think so much in the world we live in, even then, obviously it was lesser, we can put a front that we have all these things and maybe you won't share the real day-to-day struggle. And that's okay, you know, if you're trying to present and believe something else for yourself. But it is interesting when you think how we're looking at others and not knowing the real of their day-to-day life and comparing ourselves thinking that we're lesser. If you're trying to make it an entertainment, like you said, Michaela, it's not that just because you know someone, you are gonna have an easy ride or make money. Not like at all.
Yeah, so that was a heavy load you've been working with for a long time. So therapy helped, and then what has progressed to help you? And also, like, I would assume this is also just like a daily thing for a lifelong journey of just how you stay grounded in what you're doing, and then progressed into prioritizing or focusing a lot on writing for other people while you're also surrounded by some very high achieving, talented people.
I think in some ways it could go both ways. It can be motivating and simultaneously very defeating because you see very close to you all the possibilities in life. Oh, well, wow, that person, that's amazing. Okay, maybe I can work hard enough, or not even work hard enough. Maybe I can be passionate enough that I can break through these boundaries and achieve my dreams. But I think it's definitely a daily decision. As we know, it's like moods are changing every day, and it's not, oh, I found the way and then it's all perfect. And that's just not the way that life is, obviously. But in COVID, I discovered a certain therapy called EMDR. And that honestly shifted so many things in my life. Just going through back to these memories that were incredibly traumatic for me. I also had, like most people, I come from a divorced family that had a very, very bad divorce. And it lingered and unfortunately has caused a lot of pain and hurt. And for me, just lack of safety and not wanting to admit that or not wanting to succumb to that and like, no, I'm fine. Other people have it harder or something. But I did emotionally have really, really challenging things as a kid. And so going back and doing all that sort of inner child work, my brothers and I all started like child modeling as kids. So we've been in the industry in some degree since I was 2.
Oh, man. Wow.
So I basically have dealt with a lot of rejection since I was a child.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And also like the possibility. So there's that contrast of hope versus defeat. And I've been really thankful for the way that I've been able to choose healthy things, because I could have very well chosen unhealthy things. And I have chosen unhealthy things like, you know, drinking too much or self-sabotaging things. But I'm very thankful that I have, for whatever reason, the mind to want positive things and want good things and know myself enough to know when I'm slipping into that darker, unhelpful tendencies. But I also should mention, before I even go deeper into that, the songwriting piece of when I became a songwriter was really a fluke. I was pursuing another project under a different name for myself called O'Neill Hudson. I released some music. An artist heard one of the songs and was in like the orb of my husband, which by the way, he transitioned into management. He works for the guys on their management team now. And he basically has been doing that for 8 years. And one of his colleagues played my song for an artist that they were working with. And the artist was like, I want to work with her. So that's how I had my very first session, is with an artist named B. Miller. And I was so terrified. I was like, I don't know if I can do this. This is so strange. And then she was wonderful. And then the song, actually, she was signed to Hollywood Records, which is Disney Music Publishing as well. It's the same umbrella. And the song went on her record. It was the first song that I ever had with another artist. And she's an incredible artist. And at the time was doing I thought, just really innovative, cool music. And she continues to. But anyway, she had that song come out. And then that is what spearheaded me. And this is in 2018, spearheaded me into doing sessions with other artists. And then I just fell in love with it. And I didn't look back. I still continued to pursue projects that I was happy and felt authentic to me. But at the same time, I saw a path for me that was my own. And that led me to meeting my manager. Her name's Sarah Stickle, shout out. She's the greatest manager ever. And she managed me, which meant just putting me into sessions with people. And so I just started going to rooms. Actually, before that, I will say I was very self-sufficient and booked my own stuff. So anyone that's wanting to start out songwriting, you really, of course, have to hustle pretty dang hard at the start and just reach out to people.
And ask people.
It's a numbers game.
It is. There are so many of us. There's a bajillion of us, obviously, everywhere. In Nashville, London, Sweden. I mean, New York has a scene too. LA is, of course. I would say there's a lot of different styles going on, but also more pop, even though that looks different these days. It's not maybe what you would expect pop to be because it's such a range. Really, like if you're looking to pursue a career in writing, I think just reaching out to people on Instagram, messaging them, that's probably the easiest way these days.
Would you approach people that you didn't know personally?
I didn't really do that, but people have done that to me, and I have written with them. Because usually it's someone you know knows this person. Like I would say, obviously, to be careful and vet these situations, but if like someone's a mutual friend with somebody and you can even ask them like, hey, is this person okay? Am I going to be in a strange position? I've always done that. Like if someone writes me a message on Instagram the past couple of years that I've really been doing this, I will screenshot it and send it to my manager. We just have so much access these days in that way, but it's important to do your vetting, of course.
And on the flip, not be restricted by the fear of not getting
rejection.
an answer. Yeah.
Totally. And there are times too that I have not seen things and then ended up writing with someone and gone back and been like, oh my gosh, they wrote me a year ago. And I didn't know. It's not that I was ignoring it. I've heard this recently, like better to chase failure than chase success. That sounds not as good coming out of my mouth as it did out of theirs.
No, I've heard the same kind of thing. Like there's such a fear of failure that's paralyzing in this industry. If you set out and you like actually try to fail, it's really hard to fail. The fear is, oh, I'm going to reach out to this person and they're going to write back and they're going to be like, who are you?
Yeah, like
no,
LOL.
never. Like, yeah, like I don't know who you are. I would never write with you. You suck, and I'm gonna block you. Like nobody's ever gonna say that.
Yes. Yeah. And if they do, wow, there's something
your
going
answer.
on there.
Yeah,
there's your answer too.
Yeah.
But at least you have an answer. There you go. You tried. I think that's worth so much.
Yeah, I think it's also worth noting that I miss messages all the time. I try not to. I hate when people miss messages from me, or like I'm like, you didn't miss the message, you just forgot about me because I'm not important enough, and I ignored and blah, blah.
If you thought I was more important, you would have messaged me back.
Yeah,
and that's
it's
just
never
not
that
true.
either.
It's not. No, it's not. We all have so many things going on in our brains constantly, and things coming at us constantly that it's not necessarily personal, which I think is good to remind ourselves.
Yeah, everybody generally has the same kind of relationship with social media. Like they kind of hate it, they kind of love it. It's essential. I need to use it, but like I really hate it and I'm kind of icky. But then I feel like everybody sees everybody else on social media as like being like, oh no, they're just real and authentic and this is how they are. And so if they're not responding to me, like that's just who they are. It's like, no, everybody feels the same way.
Yes!
They're probably swimming in doubt too. I guarantee that person that you think is like trying to ignore you and overlooking you, like they have good friends that they've muted on social media too, because they can't see what their good friends are doing.
Yeah.
Yes, 1,000%. Yes. Oh my gosh, wisdom.
In your today world of all that's happened in your life and feeling like you're in, a good spot with your work, when you still have those creeping thoughts come in, if you have a down day, what do you do? I'll be honest, I was feeling great this week. I was doing writing sessions. We're back in the swing of our daughters in daycare, so we're able to work without distraction. And then out of nowhere last night, I just started to feel like this creeping anxiety. And it's like a physical thing that comes in. And then my brain's like, what are you anxious about? You could be anxious about this and this. And then it's a spiral. And I'm like, how do you stop it? So we talk about all the different ways that people are learning, okay, this is what I do when this happens. Do you have something, or are you like me still figuring it out?
Always figuring it out, like you. Always changing the routine of it. But recently, in the past few months, I've been really into affirmations. And I know that sounds, to me at least, icky, honestly, vocalizing these positive things. But in the past couple months, I found just different meditation sort of affirmations on Spotify. This one person named Louise Hay, she passed away, I believe, pretty recently, but she was incredible, lived to her 90s. And her whole thing was just really the power of positive thought and how it actually is a choice. And it's not going to be easy to choose. That being said, I haven't spoken about this publicly, but I am an open book because I do this all the time. But I also started medicine last year for like anxiety and depression. And that really was the catalyst for a lot of change for me. It's serotonin supplement called an SSRI. And the amount that it shifted me was so positive because I went from actively performing and writing, but going home and being drained and completely really unsure of where I was going to find happiness. And when I started this, I did a lot of therapy, and then I did acupuncture for different reasons. And then that led me to a psychiatrist. I found a medicine that works for me for all of my different sort of personal struggles, I would say. And that change, although I felt like there was a lot of shame to it, to need something, or no, I can do this on my own. But there's a certain point that I think I got to, which was, why would I suffer through this? If there's something that can help me, why would I do this to myself? This is almost like I'm torturing myself for some odd reason. And so going on medicine then led me to a much deeper self-love. I'm constantly reading books that are on self-love and self-improvement. That really helps me. And affirmations, now that I have more of like a clear mind, I see how beneficial just speaking positively is and believing that you can reach your goals and it's possible.
And just like reprogramming your thoughts, which is challenging. And there really is such a stigma around medication. And I understand it completely because we have a predatory pharmaceutical companies, and everywhere I look, we're all medicated. And I was very against medication for a long time, and also because my parents were. And we had a guest on this podcast who's a really good friend who was, very like, oh, we're holistic and natural, and we do like spiritual healers and energy workers and therapy and all that stuff. And then she shared that she started medication, and I've never talked about it, but I started medication last February because that conversation encouraged me to be open to it. And I had a therapist ask if I was open to it, and I switched therapists because I was like, no way.
Whoa.
And then the next therapist very gently asked, and my other therapist was like, she had been with me for years and had never suggested it. But this particular time in my life, my mom had a massive stroke when I was 5 months pregnant, becoming a new mom. It's just been an incredibly hard couple of years. And both therapists were like, you might just need a little bit of help for a short amount of time. It doesn't have to be forever. I started it last February and it felt life-changing. Like I felt like all of a sudden there was a fog that lifted.
Yes.
Before, I was just going through the motions and everything felt sad. Even like the good stuff, and Aaron witnessed all of this. Any good thing that would happen that I would have been excited for in the past, I was like Eeyore. Wow, cool. I get to play a festival that I've been waiting for 10 years. Who cares? It's probably going to suck anyways. How my therapist described it was like a low dose of medication to help me choose a different neural pathway to go down. But since I've been on it, it's been interesting whenever I have chosen to share it, the different reactions of people in my life that are like concerned or judgmental or
interesting.
Or I've been in settings recently where something's come up about medication and people have been like, oh my God, no. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to just keep to myself, which I'm sharing. But this is all to say to not promote medication, but just to say that we all need to seek out thorough research with care and help from professionals when we feel like we need help, and that it might look very different for all of us, and try to reserve our judgment of other people's choices, because I was the type of person that would say, hell no, I'm not taking medication with a tone of judgment.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm glad that we are in a similar trajectory, at least in embracing it. I think for me, it was more, this means that I have a problem and I don't want to admit that I have a problem.
It's shameful.
And like the history of my family's experience with mental health and medicine, I didn't want to be the same. I wanted to be the one that could beat it. But I will say one thing that really encouraged me about even just the science behind taking a certain kind of medicine, which obviously is incredibly detailed to what somebody needs, if that's something that is going to be an option for somebody. But for me, I was reading a book on, I think it was child healing work, and I read that if you are raised in a scenario where you're incredibly hypervigilant and aware of everyone's emotions, it decreases your serotonin. And literally, like, your brain cannot produce serotonin as well. And the medicine that I'm on is a serotonin supplement. And it truly has been life-changing for me. So I just thought that was so interesting to read. It had nothing to do with my medicine. It wasn't a book about medicine. And of course, there might be ways to access that more holistically. And I think there are, but there comes a time, if you experience enough trauma in your life, I think, or just the neuropathways going to that negative loop, you sometimes do need something that's going to just push you over to be able to access the positive thoughts.
I haven't taken any kind of medication for mental health or anything, but I've witnessed the positive effects it's had on Michaela and her whole transformation. And something that I see that is common between both your experiences and then also our friend Emily, who's on an earlier episode, is that you all have a history of doing the work before medicine.
Good.
So, in my interpretation is you guys all are seeing benefits because you're using it as a tool that will help me get to this finish line.
Not a cure-all.
That is such a good point, because it doesn't stop. The work hasn't stopped.
Like, right, and the medicine's not going to fix it for you, but it's going to give you more, in my observation, it gives you more of an equal playing field to try to fix it for yourself.
Yes.
Yeah. I still have anxiety dips. I still have depressive dips. I still cry on a daily basis, but it all feels more manageable, and like I'm not in a thick fog fighting my way, which is what every day felt like basically since my mom had a stroke. It just helps feel like, okay, I can handle this stuff, and I feel my range of emotions more purely. That's what my experience has been.
Ooh, I love that. That's so powerful. What a gift. And to your point too, it's not that I go around recommending people just get a fix, but I do think for me, if you're really struggling, it would be interesting to look into all of your options.
Right. And there's a lot of options. So it's a challenge of like finding the right provider who works with you. You know, you got to do all the research.
Well, I think it's a lot of work in finding just like whatever tool works for you. Like I know for me, like journaling helps. Owning my feelings and being vulnerable and talking with a group of people that are just there to listen really helps.
Yes.
That's what works for me because I've done the work and I've noticed what works for me and what doesn't. If I get to a point that those aren't really working anymore, I'd try more, and maybe eventually that'd be medication. Maybe it wouldn't. But you guys obviously exhausted a bunch of options prior to medicine too. So
and still have to do all the other things.
Yes, entirely.
All of it.
And new things. Same, Aaron. I every morning it's part of my morning routine. A meditation practice, either calming sounds or I've got like ones that are words. It's just a tool. I think all of these things are ways that can get us out of our own heads and clear the gunk out.
It's such a challenge though to do it.
Yeah.
I was just telling a friend, like, I work with a business coach and she also works with a lot of emotional stuff around it. And a month ago, we like set some boundaries together for myself. And it was like, delete Instagram every Monday for a full 24 hours and don't look at social media. And then journal for 10 minutes, same time every day. I did it for like 3 weeks and it was amazing. I saw how much calmer I felt, how much more focused I felt. It lasted 3 weeks though. I find a million excuses for why, I forgot to do that today, or, I deleted it, but I have to go on and post it. So I have to get something back. It's like the constant, I'm trying to accept I'm never going to be someone who's going to be like, yes, I have journaled every day for 10 minutes for the last 30 years. No, I probably did it for 2 weeks and then I went 6 months without it and then I did it for another 3 weeks. And then
because we're all so different with even just our levels of tolerance or discipline, or it's challenging to start habits, especially ones that are good for you, which is so strange, or things that might help you. But a thing that I've done on Instagram, I just have 15 minutes a day, a limit. Personally, I'm so in my own world that it's not as much a struggle for me to make that a habit, I think. But I do think that just having that limit is just a good reminder. Oh, it's done. Okay, the time is done. Okay. And of course, you can click an hour more and stuff like that. Yeah.
I was just going to ask, like, do you actually pay attention to the time limits? Right. I have a time limit on mine.
Yeah.
Some days I'm like, cool, my time's up, I'm done. And other days I'm like, this thing is annoying, get out of the way. Don't interrupt my video. Come on, what are you doing?
Sometimes I do, but I also get so, maybe now at this point too, I think I've had it 2 years now, the limit. I'm like, I have other things to do. I have better things to do. Things that are productive for me and loving to myself. I was also wanting to say that diversifying, I think, as a creative is really nice, and having things outside of either what's making you money or your like true goal, but just outside of that, I think it's not easy, but it's been helpful to have a lot of creative side things. Like I've been writing books, I've been writing novels that I want to pursue that as well. But it is something for me that gets me lost into a different kind of world and uses a different part of my creativity, that it's just a different part of the brain, but it's still very fun and inventive and creative. So that has been really cool to have that sort of, it's newer for me, and it's really fun to just branch out and let my mind create outside of my daily routine.
Just being able to create for the sake of creating. You don't have this thing hanging over the top. It's like, well, this needs to be this and this, or like, I have to do this quickly, or I need to make this much money with it, or like whatever it is. Just like, I just want to make something.
Yes. Although I do get into a bad pattern of being like, but now I need to make money. I do kind of, I end up being very, and maybe we have to have a little bit of that because we're creating something out of nothing. So there is an element of like innovate, but there's a balance of making it all about performing and achievement. And that's a hard balance for me.
Yeah, finding other ways to feel creative or even not creative, things that feel fulfilling that have nothing to do with meeting your life goals or your money goals or your achievement goals. We hear that a lot from people. And I feel like it's so easy to get caught up in your day-to-day of, we haven't done the thing that I love to do that has nothing to do with my career and reminds me that I'm not just a songwriter and performer so that my whole identity isn't wrapped up in that and then feels the rejection or the accolade so much more intensely. But thinking about working through the hard things in this creative career, do you remember? It was like probably one of our improv classes where we had to scat and solfege.
Wait, what's solfege again? Because I forget.
Ooh, it didn't scar you as much. Oh my God, I love that. Like, you just asked me what's do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do.
Oh my gosh, wait, yes. Dr. Harper, he made us do solfege, right?
Yes, yeah.
No, that honestly.
I will never forget a class where one of us always cried. It was like I think it was like vocal rhythm something where it was just singers and we were scatting and solfege, and it was so terrifying because he'd be like comping chords and be like, your turn, and you'd be like, do, 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 do.
Oh.
Do, 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 do,
I'm getting sweaty palms and nervous right over here.
And you and I always sat next to each other, and I remember I think one day you were crying and it was your turn to cry because we all cried, and I just will never forget the do 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 do.
Honestly, the fact that I had access to crying then makes me happy because I don't cry anymore. I mean, I do sometimes, but it's very rare. What's so funny is I remember that as being funny, but that must be some sort of self-preservation.
Maybe someone else was crying.
That's amazing.
Maybe it's been imprinted in my brain that it was someone else crying, but you were always next to me, and I remember like we were all like so anxious, and all of us cried at one point because we were just like this damn.
No, wait, you know who I think cried? I actually think it was Vanessa.
Probably. We all cried.
Because for some reason, I remember laughing because he just looked so cute too when he was doing it. Because he would be like on the piano, like da da da, and I'd be like, da. I mean, obviously, I wasn't good.
Nobody is. Unless you're Louis Armstrong or Ella Fitzgerald, you're generally not good.
But also, like, it's scatting and solfege, so it was like either laughing through it or crying through it, and just the like still going for it of like do 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 do,
just say do nonstop.
I remember being on the phone with my dad one time in college because also like my parents paid for my school, and the new school is insanely expensive, and I think my dad was pissed off that I was like being traumatized and damaged by this school that he was spending so much money on, and he was like, God damn it, he was like, you think you can't sing now just because you can't scat? He was like, no.
That's a good dad. I like to hear that. I like to hear that, although I'm sorry he had to pay for that.
I know. But I wouldn't have known you guys if I
there you go.
Positives
honestly
all around.
It's true, especially
so much
Aaron.
good.
I'll take some love, but
man, well, thank you so much for agreeing to do this, for sharing so much. I do think it really helps to hear from people who are perceived in such a positive light that like we all struggle as well. So
it's all life.
Yes, it is. We're all on the journey. Gotta love each other, give light to each other, positivity. You guys are amazing. I'm so happy to have been a part of this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Paris. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Other 22 Hours podcast. You can find more info on this episode, including links to things that we talked about, by going to theother22hours.com and clicking on episodes.
Reviews go a long way in getting our show in front of more listeners. So if you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to go leave a quick review wherever you listen to podcasts. And we'll see you back here next week for another episode.